What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the shelf, and today we are reviewing the first movie of 2025, Leigh Whannell's Wolfman. So for this review, first I'm just going to give some initial thoughts to kind of set the table for what I thought of this movie, and then before I get into it, I will give you a spoiler warning, and then we're going to discuss all of the things that really make this movie tick. I feel like it's necessary to do this. I can't really convey what I think is going on in this movie without getting into spoilers. So I will give my general thoughts, and then after that, we'll get into spoilers. First and foremost, I think Christopher Abbott and Julia Garner really carry this movie. This movie has a cast of like 5 people, so it falls on them to really carry this film, and I think they do a really great job. Christopher Abbott is somebody who I've enjoyed everything I've seen him in, from Possessor to something like Sanctuary with Margaret Qualley. The guy hasn't really turned in a bad performance that I've seen, and he was a really welcome addition in this film. Julia Garner I'm a little less familiar with, but I really enjoyed her performance as well. She really brings a humanity to this movie, and it's an understated performance perhaps, but I do believe that it really is convincing, and she really kind of gives it her all. So yeah, these two really lead the film. There's a child actor as well who plays their daughter. But for the most part, it really falls on these two to kind of carry the emotional weight of this movie, and I think they both do a great job. The cinematography is really unique and distinct here. We get a lot of these sweeping shots of the Oregon wilderness, and it looks really beautiful. And Leigh Whannell also does some very stylistic things as far as like the werewolf transformation and how that sort of plays out that is very distinct and not something that I think we've ever seen in any other werewolf movies. So I really appreciated it for that. We'll get more into it in the spoiler section, but I do think that this movie is doing some really interesting things, some very compelling things as far as themes and like metaphors that I was able to pick up on, and I really appreciated the movie for that. This movie can be a bit predictable, but I will say that despite being predictable, it's not predictable in like an annoying sense, but rather it's predictable in the sense that things happen that you expect to happen, but when they happen, it feels right, and it just kind of feels like something like locking into place, and it's satisfying in that sense, and not something that I've found to be to the film's detriment too much. We'll get more into it in spoilers, but yeah, this movie just sort of has a sort of symmetry to it that I found not quite generic, because that has a negative connotation to it, but rather it kind of gives this movie a nice bookend that makes it feel like a whole package. It's very, it's a closed loop. It's not really open-ended. And the last thing that I'll say before we move into spoilers is that if you're interested in seeing this movie, go see it. Make up your own mind, because this movie's getting a lot of hate right now, and I think it's almost entirely like overblown. And I'll get into a little bit of that in the spoiler section, but yeah, this movie, just give it a chance, and if you're willing to meet it on its own merits, then I think you'll enjoy it. People are really treating this thing like it's some sort of dumpster fire disaster, and it's really not that. It's not a masterpiece or anything, but it was a very enjoyable, perfectly serviceable movie that is like 3 stars out of 5 at the lowest, in my opinion. This movie's not interested in telling a conventional werewolf story that you've already seen a dozen times. It's trying to do something a little different, and if you're, okay with that and, willing to go on the ride that this movie wants to take you on, then I think you might enjoy it. So just know that. All right, so that is your spoiler warning. From now on, we are going to be talking about spoilers, so if you want to go see this movie, go do so, and then, maybe come back and we can discuss it a little bit in the comments. So the movie begins with some text on the screen that discusses a disappearance that happened in the 90s, as well as the fact that there is this sort of wolf disease, and it was first discovered by the indigenous peoples of this remote Oregon setting that the movie takes place in. So right off the bat, this movie is establishing that this form of lycanthropy that we see in this film is not really considered like the conventional, howl at the moon, you turn into a wolf with the light of the full moon. It's not really that. It's more like a disease that once you have it, you sort of just become this wolf. And that's sort of what this movie is laying out right from the beginning. So we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but this has to do with the way that the actual wolf looks. It's not like what you would expect necessarily. I do believe it's more rooted in what would realistically happen if you had this sort of disease, rather than a curse, which implies more of a supernatural take, where this is more of a grounded sort of like, this is what it would really be like. Which, if you look at Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man, much of the same thing. That movie is interested in showing you what a Invisible Man would look like in the year 2020 and how that would happen. So, and that movie also deals with some themes, of like domestic violence and things like that. So very much taking it and updating it for a new audience while injecting some commentary as well, which is what I appreciate so much about Invisible Man and this iteration of Wolfman. So the movie then begins with Christopher Abbott's character, whose name is Blake, and it's Blake and his dad in this house, and they're going on a hunting trip. And right away, you get the sense that Blake's dad is very strict, very possibly with a military background. He uses a lot of like military terms, and he's very strict, he's very controlling, but you also get the sense that it comes from a desire to want to protect his son. He's not like abusive in that sense. It's more so, this is how I teach you to, be cautious of your surroundings. And he wants to impart this lesson onto his son, but perhaps he doesn't know how to do it in a way that is considered healthy. We never see what happened to Blake's mom. She's never mentioned, but through some lines of dialogue, we can imply that they lost her, and perhaps in a way that could have been preventable, which is why Blake's dad is so protective now of his son. So the two embark on their hunting trip, and they very quickly encounter the wolf, and after barely surviving it, they return back to their home, where Blake finds his dad in his basement on the CB radio, and he's talking to his friend, and he's expressing that, he encountered the wolf, and that it's real, and, he's trying to basically enlist this guy into helping him, kill this thing, because, he wants to protect his family, and he wants his friend to also protect his son. After this scene, we cut to present day, where Blake is now an adult, and he has a wife and a daughter of his own. Through some quick exposition, we learn that Blake is a bit meek and timid, but also there is some of that same temper that his dad has, sort of bubbling below the surface. But Blake is very aware of it, and he tries to keep it in check so that, he doesn't, end up like his father. So I don't know that I really... How do I put this? The phrase toxic masculinity gets thrown around a lot, and it can mean a lot of different things, but I do believe that that is what this movie is about at its core. This movie is about breaking that cycle of toxic masculinity that's handed down from like fathers to sons throughout the generations. Blake wants to find his own path and discover for himself what it means to be a father and a protector. He wants to do things differently than his father did. So in the next scene, we discover that Blake's father has been missing for a really long time, and he has finally been pronounced dead by the state of Oregon. This right here is where savvy audience members, such as yourself and myself, will likely deduce that Blake's dad has been turned into a wolf, and that he is likely going to be the antagonist for the rest of the movie. So that's sort of what I mean by the movie being a bit predictable. It's probably the biggest fault I can attribute to this movie, and like the number one thing that people are likely to harp on, that and like the depiction of the wolf itself. So Blake and his family decide to go to the Oregon house and pack up all of his dad's things. On the way there, they encounter this guy, Derek, who is the son of the guy that Blake's dad was contacting on the CB earlier in the film. So this guy, Derek, he offers to escort them back to Blake's house because Blake cannot seem to remember the way. He's been gone for a really long time. We discover that Blake left home as soon as he was able to because he eventually just grew to resent his father as their relationship became more and more strained. Despite it ultimately being, rooted in a place of good intentions, Blake's dad just didn't really have the means to express it in a healthy way. So on the way to the house, they are attacked by the wolf. Derek is quickly taken out. He's dead. And in the process, in the scuffle, Blake himself gets a cut from the wolf. It's not a bite, which I found interesting. It seems to be just a big gash on his arm. So the rest of the film plays out in in Blake's family home, where they're basically, the wolf is like laying siege to them, and they're just trying to survive in the house. They're barricading the doors and all that stuff. All the while, Blake himself is slowly turning into a wolf as well. So you got a problem inside and you've got a problem outside. I really enjoy the transformation and the way it's depicted here. Basically, the whole movie is one long transformation scene rather than, in more conventional werewolf movies where the transformation scene happens, in a very impressive display of, effects perhaps, but then he's a wolf and then, antics ensue, right? This movie is different in that the entire transformation scene slowly sort of plays out throughout the runtime. So yeah, Leigh Whannell does these really interesting things with lighting and sound design that, separate this transformation from other ones. Eventually, Blake loses the ability to communicate. And it does this unique thing where, when he's trying to communicate with his family, it just comes out as like, gibberish basically, and vice versa for them. So they cannot understand each other now. This is, meant to highlight the fact that Blake is slowly losing his humanity and turning into a beast, and obviously beasts cannot talk. Before too long, Blake is totally unable to communicate with his family anymore. And perhaps I'm reading too much into it, but I found that this was perhaps a metaphor for the way that, people in failing marriages are seemingly no longer able to communicate with their loved ones or their significant other. Again, maybe I'm looking too much into that one, but, it would fit with the themes of the movie. Blake's dad had a problem really communicating in a way that was healthy. Things begin to escalate and Blake further descends into his transformation, eventually getting to the point where, he seems to have lost any sense of himself. Despite on the inside, internally, we know as the audience, we see what he's doing. We can tell that he's desperately trying to hold on to that humanity, and he tries to protect his family throughout the movie, despite, this shift, this change that's happening inside of him. The movie really hit for me because despite all this shit that's happening to Blake, he never loses that desire, that drive, that thing that keeps him going to protect his family. He never loses that, even right until the end. Eventually we get the reveal that the wolf that's been attacking them is Blake's father. No big surprise there, but what I'm more interested in is what this means thematically. Blake's father had totally lost his humanity. He had no one left to fight for and protect, and at the end he let the animal completely take over. Blake learned from his dad how important it is to care for and protect your family because they can be there one second and gone the next. But he also learned how to balance that with love and compassion from his wife and daughter. And through that, he's able to break that cycle that's been passed down from his dad and, probably from his dad before him, etc. And he's able to use that to, ultimately save his family in the end. It's because of this that I was really able to buy into this family dynamic. I really cared about what happened to these characters. And that's what makes it so tragic when ultimately Blake has to kill his father to save his family. And then, ultimately after that, Blake has to force his family to kill him to end his suffering and save them. Because I do think that despite him being able to fight against the urge to succumb to the beast, before too long it is likely that he wouldn't be able to fight it anymore and they would be in very real danger if they didn't take him out. I also don't believe that this is the kind of werewolfism or lycanthropy that, goes away when the sun comes up. I think that the way that it's depicted in this film, it's sort of this, it's not a curse necessarily, like I said, it's a disease, and once you have it, that's just how you are now, and there's really no coming back from it. That's the sense that I get anyway. It's never explicitly stated, but there's enough throughout the film to suggest this, such as Blake's dad being missing forever. If it was a normal werewolf story, eventually he would revert to a human state and, be able to contact people and live a semblance of a normal life. That's not how this movie works. But yeah, no matter what happens, Blake never stops trying to fight off the disease and save his family. And I just really found that to be really poignant and effective. So the movie ends with Blake dead, but his family is safe. His wife and daughter end the film standing in the valley that Blake and his dad used to stand in when they were still a family. And I found that to be a really cool, you know, very poetic way to end the movie. So yeah, ultimately this movie really worked for me. I don't think it's like this masterpiece or anything, but the way people are describing and talking about this movie, I don't want to say that they don't understand it, because that makes me sound pretentious or whatever, but I really do think that people are not looking at this movie the way that Leigh Whannell wanted you to look at it. And I don't think it makes me like a genius for like figuring it out or anything. I just kind of went in, and because I was hearing so much negative stuff about this movie, that I went in and I said, okay, you know, how bad can this be? And I'm watching it and I'm, you know, enjoying it, and I'm like waiting for it to start sucking, and it just never did. So yeah, I guess I was just able to, you know, meet the movie on its own terms, and I really enjoyed it for what the movie was doing. I've said this before, but I really feel like far too often people criticize a movie for what it's not trying to be, and they don't, you know, accept a movie for what it actually is trying to do. They criticize it for, you know, trying to be something that, you know, it's not trying to be. And, you know, I just think that's kind of upsetting, because, you know, this movie does not deserve the hate that it's getting. It just doesn't. Oh, also, look out for a fun Easter egg / reference to Saw. Obviously, Leigh Whannell stars in that, and there's a scene in this movie that is like almost a direct homage to that. There's no way you can convince me it's not. And I was like, oh, that's fun. That's cool. I like that. All right, guys, so that's my thoughts on Wolfman. I think this movie is, like I said, getting a ton of hate, but you know, if you liked it, please let me know down in the comments so I can know that I'm not the only one out there who enjoyed it. And if you have criticisms of it, please let me know in the comments. I'm always willing to have a conversation about things. I'm not saying I'm like, you know, I'm right here. It's totally possible that you picked up on all the same things that I did. I'm not special. I put my pants on 2 legs at a time, or 1 leg at a time, just like everyone else. And it's possible that you totally understand what this movie's doing and you just don't like that. And that's totally valid. So if that's the case, let me know down in the comments. So yeah, like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't. We talk about new movies, old movies, physical media, and horror in general. So with all that being said, guys, please take care and watch more movies.